All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Empowering Homes with Energy Storage. We're glad you're here today. I'm going to start today's presentation with a quick reminder on how to use Zoom. I want to be sure that since we have some great information to cover, that there is a question and answer window. So please go ahead and as you think of questions, drop them in there, and we have time at the end for some discussion and clarification. So please feel free to add questions as you think of them. All right. Hello, I'm Melinda Dinnan. I'm the marketing manager for the California Electric Homes program, and I'm excited to share this information today to create a buzz about including energy storage for projects in your pipeline and using incentive dollars to help pay for it. Joining me today is Dave Stevens from EPRI to talk with us about energy storage. So now that I've introduced our presenters, going to launch a quick poll, and maybe you can share some information about who's joining us today. All right, we've got some great results coming in, and it looks like we have builders, developers, CEAs, and property owners. So thank you again for the quick poll and sharing with us who is on the line today. All right, our agenda. We've already covered a welcome and introductions. I'm going to talk briefly about California Electric Homes, CalEHP. We're going to move into California energy storage overview, hear about some benefits. Dave will share some extra information, tips and tricks, and then you can set from CalEHP and we'll have a discussion. So about CalEHP, California Electric Homes is affectionately known as CalEHP because we need one more alphabet soup, right? So the program incentivizes the construction of market rate, all electric buildings, and the installation of energy storage and other technologies that would not otherwise be constructed or installed. The program's funded by the California Budget Act of 2021 and is administered by the California Energy Commission. Tier C is where I work, and our team is the lead implementer for the program. And we are supported by program partners, including EPRI, to provide support and technical assistance to all of our participants. All right, next up, I'm going to introduce you to Dave from EPRI to talk more about energy storage. Take it away.
All right, terrific. Thanks, Melinda. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Very quickly, EPRI stands for the Electric Power Research Institute. I do research at EPRI on energy storage and focus quite a bit on customer-sited energy storage, which is why Melinda and team asked me to come and present here today. What I want to do is give you a good background of energy storage as a whole, and in particular, how it works for residential customers. So what better way to start talking in any format than to begin a conversation with beer? Melinda, it looks like there's a slide issue. If you can just forward, perfect. So we have energy storage here, which is energy in power. Energy is analogous to the size of the keg. In power is analogous to how quickly we can get that beer out of the keg. So on the left here, we have a Cornelius keg. That is a 40-pint keg. And if we can extract beer from that at 20 pints per hour, it will take us 2 hours to get all of the beer out of there. And we have what is called a 2-hour keg or 2-hour battery if we're talking about batteries. So that's how these things are measured. If we have, the pony keg, 62 pints, and we extract the beer at the same rate, at 20 pints per hour, now we have about a 3.1 hour keg. And a full-size keg, 124 points, if we were to do it at 100 pints per hour, we'd have 1.24 hours of beer. So as you can see, and I think there might be one more that you can go forward here, Melinda, if you don't mind. If we were to take that, that's fine either way. If we were to change, there we go, from 100 pints per hour to only 20 pints per hour, we'd all of a sudden have a 6.2 hour keg. If we go back over to the left, we look at the Cornelius keg. This is kind of the simplest one to look at. If we were to change that to 10 pints per hour, we'd have a 4-hour keg. If we were to change that to 40 pints per hour, we'd have a 1-hour keg. That's what we're talking about with energy, is the beer in the system. Power is how quickly we can get that beer in and out. So that's that. Please, next slide, Melinda. Thank you. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about energy storage. And what does energy storage do? It stores energy. We are going to put energy in the battery and store it there. There are losses round trip, whether there are losses sometimes when we're putting the energy in, there are losses when we're holding the energy in there, and there are some losses when we are extracting that energy out. Most residential lithium-ion batteries are about 90% efficient. So you put in 100 kilowatt hours, you'll get out 90 kilowatt hours. That does sometimes hurt the economics a little bit, but not significantly, at least in California, where the stuff is becoming extremely economic, and we'll be talking more about that. So if we have a 10 kilowatt hour battery energy storage system, that's what BESS stands for, in a 5 kilowatt inverter, it would take us 2 hours to get the 10 kilowatt hours out of the energy storage system. Most batteries for the home are about 2 hours, give or take. Next slide, please. And as you know, ask questions at any time. I'll do my best to answer them as we go through. So we want to talk a little bit about what's going on with energy storage, why this has become so popular. Just one moment here. I'm a little cold, so I'm not going to share my screen the whole time. What's going on here? Well, one is that energy storage prices have dropped by over 80% over the last 11 years. Nobody saw this coming, at least not industry-wide. There might be a few people, your Elon Musk, who might have seen this potential here, but very few, 80%. So with these costs coming down so drastically over time, what that has done is made energy storage, whether we're talking about residential systems like we're talking about here, we're talking about electric vehicles, or we're talking about grid scale energy storage systems, all of these are becoming much more economic, much more quickly. And as manufacturing scales up, we're driving down the cost for these packs. Now, we don't expect to see quite the same reduction in prices over the next 10 years that we saw over the last, of course, as we're getting closer and closer to the efficiencies that we can. But we should see prices continue to decrease over the long term. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that we're all here, and one of the reasons that California incentivizes energy storage, CalEHP does, the CEC does, there are many different programs that allow customers to do it, is something called the duck curve. If you watch an entry stage energy storage presentation and they don't talk about the duck curve, I don't know what they're thinking. This is kind of the thing that everybody talks about. As you can see, this figure looks a lot like a duck. And what is happening here is that as California installs more and more photovoltaics, solar energy on rooftops and elsewhere, during the middle of the day when load is lowest, because everybody's at work, nobody's cooking dinner, etc., nobody's charging their vehicles, during the middle of the day, what is also happening is PV, or photovoltaics, solar, is producing the most energy. So what we are now seeing as of last year for the first time is negative load on the system, where we are producing more energy, more solar, than we are consuming energy. And that creates some issues. It creates some economic issues where the price for energy goes way, way down in the middle of the day. And then during the evening peak, it goes up really, really quickly. The fact that that neck of the duck, if you will, is so aggressively pointing upwards, that the rate of change is so fast, means that the energy system, the utility system, needs to really react to that very quickly. And so what we're seeing is energy storage being used to store that PV in the middle of the day, and then use it during the evening peak to reduce that evening ramp, or the neck of the duck, and the evening peak. And so we're seeing more and more of that, and that's happening, again, at the grid scale, and it's also happening with residential customers as well. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that California is incentivizing customers to help with this duck curve issue is that they are creating new rates. So most recently, there's a new rate called the net billing tariff, or some people refer to it as NEM 3, where in the past, what happened is if you put solar on your rooftop, you were getting paid for that solar export, regardless of whether it was in the middle of the day or not, the full price of electricity. But as we've discovered, during the middle of the day, the prices for electricity are really very, very low. And you can see that especially in some of these spring months on the right, in red here, where it's less than a penny per kilowatt hour for energy at certain times. So the NEM 3 rate, or net billing tariff, incents customers to use energy storage if they have solar, to charge the battery off of solar during those times, and then discharge it in the afternoon when the prices go up. And what NEM 3 does essentially is it ensures that if anybody's installing energy storage, solar in California, they are strongly incentivized to purchase energy storage, because it will bring their net cost of the system down, as they are able to store the energy when it is cheapest and export it or use it when it is most expensive. NEM 3 is a new tariff where any new interconnection requests will automatically go on this net billing tariff. Old interconnections and updates to old interconnection requests are still going through the system, and will continue to go through next year as well. But if you are doing a new interconnection request for a new build, for example, these systems are going to be on NEM 3, and if you're installing solar, you're almost certainly going to need to install energy storage with it if you want that to be cost effective. The payback for these systems in San Diego is usually about 8 years, whereas in SCE and PG&E territories, closer to 10 years today. Please, Melinda, go ahead and advance the slide. So as I said, in California here, we are seeing a lot more people use energy storage when they install PV. And we saw with the advent of NEM 3 a very quick jump from about 11% to 19% over only a couple of quarters. That is going to continue to go up. And in fact, as of Q2 of 2024, the attachment rate for customers under the net billing tariff is greater than 95%. So essentially, everybody who is installing solar under the net billing tariff is installing energy storage with it, because that is the only economic way to do so today. Next slide, please. So when should you consider installing storage in California? Well, you want to do that during design. In fact, the Title 24 rules ensure that you have to consider storage and PV and design for storage and PV when you build new homes. So whether you are not necessarily forced to include PV and energy storage on that home, but you must design for it. So you want to, right off the bat, when you're in the design phase, consider your breaker sizing, which is spelled wrong here, and your different wire gauge, et cetera, so that you can accommodate energy storage and solar. PV would be a good idea too, but that's not what, EVs would be a good idea too, but that's not what we're discussing here. Again, all new interconnection agreements for PV systems will be implemented under NEM 3.0 or the net billing tariff. And the other reason you might want to consider installing storage right now is that costs are lower than they would be. So you have, of course, the CalEHP incentive, which we're going to talk about in much more detail later. You also have things like investment tax credits. This was part of the IRA from the Biden administration, where you can essentially get 30% reduction in the cost of energy storage systems via tax credits. And for low income, it's as high as 50%. Of course, these could somehow be repealed by the new administration, so you want to be aware of that. And if you're installing energy storage, probably get those applications in as soon as possible. I have no idea whether the new administration is going to repeal these or not, but it is possible. And of course, backup power, or resilience as it's often called in the industry, provides a lot of value to homeowners. If you're selling a home and you're only increasing that home price by a marginal amount and you sell it with backup power, that sounds pretty good, that you're never going to have to deal with outages. You're not going to have to deal with your alarm clock not going off in the evening. You're not going to necessarily have to deal with your refrigerator. You're not going to have to deal with these public service power shutoffs or PSPS events. These are all really important to customers and can increase the value of the home when you have energy storage. Next slide, please. So here we're going to talk about a bunch of the benefits of energy storage. Most of these benefits are going to translate to the customer, and that's how we're looking at it here. But there are other ways to look at it as well. The first is that backup power or resilience that we've been talking about. Most new energy storage systems installed on homes are going to be installed with an AC interconnection. So in other words, you can charge that battery from solar, you can charge it from the grid. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to this. Basically, that AC connection is better for demand response programs. The fact that you can charge from the grid means that you can charge when energy prices are low and discharge when they're high, and you're not reliant on solar charging your battery as you would be on a cloudy day and you're DC connected. You can't get that battery charged, and that hurts DR programs, for example. It also allows you to use it for time of use applications, for example, when, again, you wouldn't otherwise be able to charge that battery on a cloudy day. The advantage to DC coupled systems is that your efficiency is higher because you don't have that inverter between the solar system and the PV, which does hurt efficiency a bit. In the past, we saw a lot more DC connected systems for tax purposes in particular, but those rules have been changed. And so we are seeing many more AC connected systems. That's kind of the way to go. It allows the customer the most leeway to use the battery in the way that they'd like and take most advantage of different programs and opportunities that may be offered by their utility or others to earn money for the use of their battery on the system. Next slide. So one of the ways in which these batteries are used, and maybe the most frequent way, other than resilience, is time of use price time shifting. So anybody who lives in California and is on this call knows that when they pay for their energy bills, there's a period of time, say 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock is where I live, where your energy costs go up drastically. That is the peak of the day. That sort of is the when that neck of the duck curve starts to increase and you start to see the head of the duck, all those sort of energy use is going up, and that's when energy is most costly. So what time shifting does is it charges the battery during the evening hours and discharges it during those hours when your price for energy is highest, ensuring that you're paying for cheap energy and using cheap energy and not expensive energy. So this is one of the most popular ways to use an energy storage system. A lot of people, unfortunately, we've found in various areas, don't have their batteries set up correctly. So we'll discuss that a little bit more. It's very nice to make sure that these systems are set up correctly. Homeowners aren't always experts in this stuff, but setting these systems up for time of use is very important. Next slide. With self-consumption, it's actually very, very similar, only instead of charging during the evening or early morning hours, what you're trying to do is charge from your own solar generation. So during the middle of the day here, we see solar generating from PV, and we're using this battery to capture that energy rather than exporting the PV to the grid at those very low prices. And then we're using it in the late afternoon hours when, again, prices are highest. So basically the same, has the same impact as time of use, but instead of charging off of the grid, we're charging off of the PV that is on our rooftop, for example. Next slide. What happens sometimes on a cloudy day, though, however, is that you won't generate that PV. And so what will happen is that battery will charge again off of the grid during the belly of that duck curve when demand is very low. If it doesn't have enough PV to fill up the 10 kilowatt hours of the battery, for example, and it will still be able to discharge during the afternoon hours at 4 to 9 p.m. to make sure that you're not paying for those higher energy storage rates. Again, the value of this is rather significant, and if you're installing PV, you're looking at about 8 to 10, 8 to 11 years to pay off the system. That's if you sort of buy it as a retrofit. If it's, on your house when you purchase it, of course, well, I guess the payback is about the same amount of time, generally speaking. And of course, this will change with different tariffs in different areas. But you're including that cost in that cost of the home up front. And so really have 30 years to pay that back over time. And it doesn't hit you as hard as if you're buying it after you've purchased a home and retrofit your system with PV and your home with PV and energy storage. So next slide. And again, if I'm confusing anybody, if I'm going too quickly, if I'm going too slowly, if I'm not discussing the right stuff, just let me know. Curious, I do see a question here. Curious to know, apart from the payback, what is the lifespan of these new AC batteries, and what is the standing capacity over time versus degradation? Great question. So essentially, the lifetime of these batteries is usually 10 to 15 years. It's going to depend on how often you use them. If you don't use your battery much, it can last much longer. If you charge it and discharge it about once per day, that 10 to 15 years is usually what we're looking at. And most of these batteries are warranted to have 80% of the capacity after that 10-year period. And so after 10 years, you still have 80% of your capacity. It will continue to drop, but you don't necessarily need to replace it right away. You can probably wait until year 15. So Maria, I hope that answers your question. Demand charge reduction, I think we can skip this. This is very rarely applicable to residential customers. It's most applicable to C&I customers. But essentially what we're doing is we're clipping the peak. There might be certain circumstances where a residential customer has demand rates, and energy storage can be a cost saver for those customers, but those are rare. So we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, demand response, another big one. So what we're seeing here is that customers who are using energy storage to avoid, time of use charges are all well and good, but not every day is the same. And so some utilities prefer flexibility on when to charge those batteries and when to discharge those batteries. So what utilities will do is they'll set up demand response programs, which are also known as virtual power plants in some places in VPPs. There's a big discussion in the industry as whether or not they're the same thing or not, and whether we conflate terms, and we probably do, but it's simple. So we'll just call it demand response or VPP. We'll use them interchangeably here, where the utility can control when the battery is charging and discharging. And the utility is going to pay a customer to do that. And customers might make as much as $2 per kilowatt hour discharging to the grid if they have a Tesla system, for example, in California, where Tesla has a very large VPP, when they discharge when the utility asks. So that can be much better than the time of use rates. So a customer might have their battery working on time of use rates automatically every day, but every once in a while they'll get a signal from the utility that says, you know what, we really want you to charge and discharge exactly when we ask. We want to charge when, again, those prices are low and demand is low, and we want to discharge when demand is highest. So on very hot days during the summer, when everybody's got their air conditioning, you'll see these demand response programs become a big deal, and people can really help to pay off their battery much more quickly by enjoying these VPP or demand response programs that they sign up with, either through their utility or through their energy storage system website or app. Next slide, please. So some extra info, tips, and tricks just to leave you with. I know a lot of you might have questions about energy storage systems, permitting, interconnection, installation. I did want to make sure that we address some of those larger scale issues that many of you will be dealing with in the future. Here we see the 4 most popular systems to be installed nationwide. Neither EPRI nor CalEHP is suggesting that you install these systems or that they are better or worse than any others. They are just the most popular systems when it comes to the photovoltaic and energy storage market share. The Tesla Powerwall, for example, is a 13.5 kilowatt hour, 5.8 kilowatt system. That's, about 2 hours. It's a little bit more than a 2-hour system. Enphase, about the same. SolarEdge is exactly a 2-hour system, and LG Prime, again, about the same. Most of these systems are approximately 2-hour systems. Doesn't mean you have to discharge them in 2 hours. You can take your time and discharge them over 4 hours if you'd like. Most of them, again, come with that 10-year warranty, which generally speaking says at the end of 10 years, they'll have 80% of their energy storage capacity remaining. It's important to know that some of these units will have more customer-friendly interfaces than others. They'll have access to more demand response programs than others. Tesla is certainly one of those where, as far as VPPs and demand response programs, they have done an excellent job of creating value for their customers by allowing them to enroll in those programs. You can say the same for many of these other systems, but Tesla has probably done a superior job in that respect. You want to consider not just the discharge power, that 5.8 kilowatts if we're talking about the Powerwall, 3.84 if we're talking about the Enphase, but they also have peak amounts that they can discharge for very short periods of time. So, if your AC comes on and you have a very large power demand very quickly, some of these batteries will allow you to have a peak power discharge to match that. Sometimes one battery can do that depending on the size of the AC system. Sometimes you would need 2 batteries to start up an AC system only on your battery if the grid were down, for example. So consider that discharge power, but also the peak power, which is normally limited to, about 10 seconds. Inverters and transfer switches are not always priced into the energy storage system. Make sure you're not paying extra for those. The inverter is what changes the DC electricity in your battery into AC for your home and your grid. The transfer switch is what allows you to island from the grid and be resilient and have that backup power when the grid is down. And of course, you may want to consider matching the energy storage system with the type of PV that you're installing, making sure that they integrate well. As we all know, companies are great at making sure that it's very simple when you do it with their systems, but sometimes more complicated when you integrate one system with another. Next slide, please. So some very quick permitting tips here. I wanted to send you away with some links. I'm sure that Melinda will be sending out these slides after this call. I do link to the draft energy storage permitting guidebook, which includes all of the relevant codes for behind-the-meter energy storage systems. As I said before, single-family and low-rise multifamily homes now must install PV and be battery ready in most circumstances, whereas high-rise multifamily must install both PV and energy storage. This is for new home builds, as I understand it, and perhaps some retrofits. So make sure that you're aware of that. You're using the permitting guidebook if you're not familiar with the rules under Title 24, for example, and you're sizing systems correctly to the home, et cetera. I also want to discuss very briefly the solar app, which is a new system that is being adopted by more and more cities in California and to an extent elsewhere, Arizona, Texas, which is intended to speed up the process of getting your permitting done. So it's going to automate a lot of the equipment listings, make sure that the equipment that you're installing is applicable and permitted by the state of California. It's going to verify circuit parameters, et cetera. And in most cases, the research done by NREL several years ago, a couple of years ago, was that the solar app can make the installation of these systems a bit quicker as it automates the process, make sure that you have all of the right paperwork in when you need it, and you don't get a call from that permitting authority down the line saying, oh, you forgot this, or this was out of spec, et cetera. Sort of handles a lot of that up front. So that's something to consider using as you're permitting. Again, not all cities use that in California, but many do. Next slide. You also have to make sure that you're taking care of interconnection. This can, as well as permitting, be long pole in the tent for installing PV and energy storage in homes. Each utility in California is responsible for implementing Electric Rule 21, which is the general guidelines that utilities must follow for interconnection of PV and energy storage. However, they're allowed to implement that slightly different based on their specific needs at the utility and how they interpret things. And so I have linked you here to the Electric Rule 21 website, where you can find the tariffs for each specific utility in the interconnection websites where you can begin interconnection. Again, this is a long pole in the tent. You'll want to start this just as soon as you can. Most interconnection requires permitting. If all interconnection will require permitting to be done, some will require permitting to be at least started before you begin your interconnection. And there are certain parts of California where installing energy storage in particular, and PV as well, might be easier than others. And you might be able to do different things with it, such as export versus not allowed to export to the grid. That's based on a capacity analysis. Each distribution feeder is different, might have more PV, more load on it. What they don't want to see happening is for all the PV and energy storage to discharge at once into the grid and create backflows of energy. That can have some implications that can be either dangerous or can lead to outages, et cetera. So they try to limit that. They have fast track applications for areas where that is not an issue, and it can really speed up your interconnection process. You can skip the detailed study process. Make sure that you're working with vendors who are certified by the specific battery system vendor that are using, and they should be familiar with these rules and how to get through the process as quickly as possible. And experience, of course, counts. Next slide, please. So real quick before I conclude and hand it back over to Melinda, who will go over more of the CalEHP benefits, some installation tips. Make sure that you begin your interconnection process with your utility as quickly as possible. Use those licensed electricians that have been certified by the energy storage manufacturer to speed things up and make sure the work is done right. Installing energy storage system outdoors is a priority these days, not necessarily a requirement, but these systems can be dangerous. They can start fires. They need to be installed behind firewalls. They can off gas and have some nasty gases. There are dangers to lithium-ion technologies. And so installing these systems outdoors alleviates a great deal of that risk. Yeah, you want to mount it on non-flammable materials, ensure that it's installed above typical, snow levels. If you're in an area where there can be 2 feet of snow, you want to install that energy storage system above that 2-foot mark. And of course, work with the energy storage technicians, et cetera, as you go on. What you don't want to do, don't install the energy storage system in an area subject to extreme temperatures, such as if you can avoid installing on a south-facing wall, that's the best, because when you get that direct sunlight in the afternoon beating down on these systems, it's going to reduce the efficiency, sometimes the capacity of the system. You won't get as much value from it. Avoid areas where they're subject to flooding, snow accumulation, as we talked about earlier, et cetera, and install in areas that are, not going to be interfered with children, pets, wildlife to the extent possible, and not going to be impacted by vehicles. Some people will use bollards, especially if it's an area where, like a parking area where cars will be driving around. Bollards will increase the safety of that system and are generally required by permitting if there are going to be cars driving by it. And then give yourself a barrier against flammable vegetation wherever you install that energy storage system. So real quick, I do see a question here by John before I hand it back over to Melinda. I'm just reading it now. We've heard a lot about the benefits of solid-state battery technologies for EVs. Will these benefit residential and commercial storage in the same way? There are potentially enormous benefits to solid-state energy storage. There is a lot of publicity around this. There are people who are saying, they figured it out, they've cracked the code. I'm a bit skeptical that some of this is not just marketing new technologies, but the reason why solid state would be so beneficial for EVs is that it brings down the size of the energy storage system by as much as 50%. And so you can put more energy storage in the same area. That won't have the same drastic impact that it does when we're talking about installing these systems outdoors, but it will be beneficial. So hope that answers your question. Melinda?
All right, thank you. I want to thank John, for asking that great question. And Dave, thanks for sharing a response. Next up, I'm going to talk with you briefly about the incentives available for market rate projects in your pipeline. So first up, all projects need to meet these requirements to qualify for CalEHP incentives, and that is both the base incentives and the bonus incentives. So I've listed here the prerequisites that need to be included in your market rate projects. First and foremost, we're looking for all electric new construction. So there can be zero gas to the building. I've listed the other prerequisites here. All right. Next up, we've got some base energy storage incentives. So if you are adding energy storage that we just learned more about, we have incentives per kilowatt hour for energy storage. And then if your project is located in an all-electric REACH code jurisdiction, and if you don't know that, we are here to help you. Our team can certainly do a zip code search and share some information about what's required for the jurisdiction you are planning to build in. And also there are additional energy storage incentives coming in 2025. So I just want to let you know our team is here to help you with any questions you might have. We also have some additional bonus incentives. So these are bonuses for projects that include technology that is above the minimum building and energy code requirements. So this graphic here shows the per unit. So I want to say that again, per dwelling unit incentives for bonuses for your project. So again, multifamily condos and ADUs, it's $600 for the envelope package, and that's $600 per unit. So that can really accelerate the return on investment when you include these above current minimum requirement measures. All right. Next, we're going to move into a discussion so we can offer any additional clarification for items that we have not yet covered. I've also included our contact information in the chat, and it looks like we have quite a few questions. So I'm going to send it back to you, Dave, for a question about, yeah, great.
Yeah, I hope I'm seeing them all. I see Gabrielle here, or Gabriel. What about vehicle to house bi-directional chargers? Can they be used for home battery systems? So we're going to see a lot more of electric vehicles that are able to do bi-directional charging in the future. The Ford F-150 was probably the first major vehicle to come out and allow you to back up your house off of the EV. Certainly it could, in theory, be used. You can charge your EV off of your battery and your home battery, and your home battery off of your EV, potentially. It gets a little bit complicated and depends on how the systems are set up, et cetera, but it is possible. A big advantage to having a home battery versus just depending on your EV, of course, is that the home battery is always at home. If you have family and you're not necessarily home, it also doesn't require you to use EV range to back up your home. So, a lot of times PSPS or public service power shutoffs are a big deal. There might be forest fires nearby where you're using energy storage to back up your home. You don't want to deplete your EV such that you can't leave the area if you need to. So long story short, EVs are going to be a much larger part of the conversation in years to come. They're just going to be a huge part of the conversation. And yes, they can, depending on the manufacturer and the system, some can be used to charge your home or discharge to the grid, and we're going to see more and more of that over time. Let's see, will you continue to offer induction cooking exclusion until those products become more widely available and less pricey? I think this might be a question for you, Melinda.
It is a question for me. So currently, we do not have authorization from the CEC, the California Energy Commission, to extend that exclusion into 2025. However, that can always change. So I appreciate your asking the question. And as of today, no, we cannot offer the exclusion, but that can change at any time. So stay tuned. Let's see. Our next question is also for the program, which it is, how has CalEHP considered incentivizing battery integrated appliance like Cooper and Impulse? And can you confirm eligibility of these appliances for the CalEHP storage incentives? So right now, the battery storage incentive, it is a base incentive, and it is for capturing electricity generated from solar PV. So it's battery storage from photovoltaic. I cannot rule out the possibility of incentivizing these battery integrated appliances in the future, but as of today, we are not able to offer any additional bonuses for those. But thanks for the great idea and stay tuned. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I've included our contact information for the California Electric Homes Program, CalEHP, in the chat. I have also shared a slide here, and we are ready and available to take your questions and hopefully enroll the projects in your pipeline for incentives, energy storage incentives, and bonus incentives. So on behalf of the team at CalEHP, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.